got Kalen DeBoer here. No relation to Caleb Calhoun, even though the names sound somewhat similar. And he's building a Washington South, it looks like. What the H?
What the? What was he thinking?
Release the hounds.
The Dave Hooker Show.
Keep cool.
A presentation of OffTheHookSports.com.
It's brought to you by Sports Treasures. I'll tell you more about Sports Treasures here momentarily. But tell me about this Kalen DeBoer staff before I tell you that he needs to copy Tennessee and everything that Josh Heupel has done, which sounds crazy. That could be a what the H of its own, because Tennessee copying Alabama would have been the topic this time last year, but now it's Alabama needs to copy Tennessee, and I'm going to tell you why. But first, give me a thumbnail sketch of this sketchy staff that DeBoer is putting together in Tuscaloosa, and it's brought to you by Sports Treasures, carrying over 5 million sports treasures and so much more. Follow on Facebook for great Tennessee and other sports teams memorabilia, daily updates. Follow them, Sports Treasures TN, Sports Treasures TN. Tell me about this staff, Caleb.
So Nick Kelly, who reports for the Tuscaloosa News, has broken down.
He's shady. Great guy.
What'd you say?
I said he's shady, but I was joking. Great guy. Go ahead.
Oh, he has broken down who is on the staff so far. So head coach Kalen DeBoer, offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, coming with Kalen DeBoer from Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Defensive coordinator Kane Womack from South Alabama.
That Grubb's a real worm, by the way.
I'm sorry?
That Grubb's a real worm, by the way.
See,
that's what happened. Your jokes are going to be complete trash once you have your son. So, by the way, Caleb announced that he has a commitment to the family as his missus is expecting. All right, go ahead, Caleb. Congratulations.
Okay, so thank you. Scott Huff at Washington, offensive line coach, also comes from Washington. Nick Sheridan, the tight ends coach, also comes from Washington. Tennessee fans will be familiar with that because he coached at Tennessee for a while. Also having coached at Tennessee, Robert Gillespie, who is being retained on the Alabama staff. Jamarcus Shepard comes from Washington. Freddie Roach being retained on the Alabama staff. And then two defensive assistants, Maurice Linguist out of Buffalo and Colin Hitchler out of Wisconsin. So only three coaches on the staff right now that are coming from other schools in SEC country, one South Alabama, two Alabama. But he's basically building his Washington staff. And I also wanted to point out that Alabama, they had a five-star quarterback into the transfer portal today. It was today. Meanwhile, they have just added Washington transfer quarterback Austin Mack, leading many to believe that Kalen DeBoer is just bringing his Washington team to Alabama.
Well, that is what he's doing, and I'm not surprised. Josh Heupel did that in large part, brought a bunch of guys from UCF to make up his staff, and the question was, pardon me, about recruiting. Heupel has answered that to some extent. How? Two ways. NIL is a big factor. I'm not going to say that cash isn't king, but the culture that Tennessee has, and I'm not just saying this to make you feel good about Josh Heupel, it's a fact. The culture that Tennessee has is pretty special right now. I think you saw that in the Citrus Bowl. They wanted to go out there and for pride win that game when really it was an 8-4 season. Who cares? But not only win, but dominate. So Bama needs to copy Tennessee. That's the key. They need to copy Tennessee's culture. They need to copy whatever they're doing in NIL. Listen, I don't work with the guys at Spire Group, and I don't know if they would take this phone call, but if I'm a major booster, I'm calling around the different schools that are doing well in NIL, and I'm saying, hey, ultimately, we're businessmen. I would like to pick your brain. It's the same thing I did when we started building Off the Hook Sports. I talked to 1,000 people, from Paul Feinbaum to whoever you can imagine, about how to put this whole thing together. That is exactly what Kalen DeBoer or a booster or someone with their collective needs to do. Heard an interview with athletic director Greg Byrne of Alabama, and it sounded pathetic. It sounded sad. You know what his response was to losing the Saban discount? In other words, players go to Nick Saban for less NIL money because it'll get them to the pros. his response was, I can't tell you how many transfers have come in, and they have said, wow, these facilities are unapproachable. They are incredible. They're better than the other big time school I was at. Yeah, whatever. They may be a little bit nicer, but would you stay at a Marriott over a Holiday Inn, for instance? I'd stay at a full service Marriott, sure. But I'd stay at a Holiday Inn if it meant that somebody was paying me $100,000 more than the Marriott people. So that's not going to do it. Their facilities aren't that much nicer than everybody else, although I'm sure they're right up at the top in the country. So what are your thoughts on Bama copying Tennessee? I think that's exactly what they need to do.
Yeah, but you are right. They're missing one big part of this with copying Tennessee, which is NIL. You're right. I for the record, and I'm glad you brought this up.
Yeah, but that's my point. They've got to get that in place.
Right. I'm glad you brought this up. If I hear one other major program say we've got great facilities, so we're going to win, I swear I'm going to blow my brains out. Okay, because this isn't the 90s. We can agree on this, Dave, right? When you first started covering Tennessee in the 90s, there was a noticeable difference in facilities between a Tennessee or an Ole Miss or an LSU or an Alabama, right? There was.
When I started going to road games and covering, more so when I started covering recruiting camps, I was stunned how poor the facilities were at some schools. In particular, Miami stood out.
Okay, so that doesn't exist anymore, right? They're all, even if one facility is better than the other, they're all relatively in the same tier, aren't they? They all have a lot of nice things. You're right. It's like staying at a Holiday Inn or a Marriott that are both like full service 5-star hotels with continental breakfast. You know what I mean? It's like one might be a little bit nicer, but whatever. It's not going to outweigh so many other things. This is just a quick story. You do know that Butch Jones would tell people that Tennessee is going to out-recruit Alabama because they have a nicer juice bar in 2015.
Yes, I do know that. And it wasn't that nice of a juice bar.
I love that's still my favorite story. I can't wait. I wanted to see Butch Jones in the living room. Like, you may go to the NFL with Nick Saban, but you won't get that juice bar that you get at Tennessee. So come to Tennessee.
It's true. You have to, don't you have to take a little pride if you're Tennessee now? And we're talking about Bama copying Tennessee as opposed to vice versa in and of itself. I mean, how much are you as Tennessee?
But I'm trying to debate this. They're not copying Tennessee. I disagree with you. I think
they
they're
should.
copying.
I'm not saying they are. I'm saying they should.
But what Kalen DeBoer is actually doing is more copying Butch Jones. Butch Jones brought his Cincinnati staff largely with him to Tennessee. And look, I think SEC ties are overrated, but I think you have to value that some. Let's talk Josh Heupel real quick. What's Josh Heupel's biggest staff move that he made, Dave? It's Rodney Garner, right? Above anybody else.
You wouldn't say it's Tim Banks?
Tim Banks is a solid one. Tennessee's not doing what they're doing without Rodney Garner, though. Rodney Garner is the most important staff member on that team.
Okay. If you throw in recruiting, I'll give you that. But I think as just a on-field coach, it could be a coin flip between him and Banks.
Fair enough. I just think that Tim Banks isn't the only. I think he's the best you can get, but I don't think he's the only coordinator you could get who does what he does. I think you
agreed.
There are more.
Agreed, but I don't think there are a lot of dudes that want to be on the other side of a Heupel offense. See what I'm saying? I think there are a lot of DCs that'll be like, I'm good.
That might be fair. You're right. But there are no Rodney Garners. There is one Rodney Garner as a defensive line coach in college football, and his name is Rodney Garner. And that helped Tennessee recruit at such a high level in the SEC when Josh Heupel first got there. Alabama's got their closest is Robert Gillespie, but do you consider Robert Gillespie anywhere near the same stratosphere as Rodney Garner on this front?
I mean, I was incredibly surprised at how average he was when at Tennessee from a recruiting standpoint, to be real honest with you. I kind of thought he'd step in, and maybe it's because they look a little bit similar and coach the same position, but I kind of thought maybe he'd get something like a Trooper Taylor, but I didn't think he had a monster impact on Tennessee's recruiting when he was at Tennessee. And quite frankly, you should. If you coach running backs, your job is to recruit in college.
That's literally why you coach as running backs. You're right. I mean, that's Jerry Mack is at Tennessee, so he can help Tennessee get kids from Memphis and Mississippi. That's why he's there. That's literally the reason he's there, so Tennessee can have a presence in West Tennessee. And I mean, you are absolutely right. Is Kalen DeBoer? Here's the question. And I don't want to be one of those guys, because I'm sorry, Dave. One of the things that drives me crazy is like when SEC fans are like, well, you're not going to win if you don't know the SEC. You got to have SEC ties to win in the SEC. That's BS. Okay. There have been plenty of guys that have no SEC ties that have won at a high level. However, don't you have to have at least a certain baseline of SEC ties on your staff if you're going to win? Somebody that knows the lay of the land in recruiting?
Well, you mean Southeastern ties, not necessarily SEC.
Yeah, Southeastern
right?
ties. Southeastern ties.
Yes, and actually this would surprise a lot of people, but SEC ties help as well. I mean, I knew one coach that was at Tennessee, I'm not going to name his name, that would get calls from another school saying, "Hey, we don't have room for this guy. You should take a look at him." I know that sounds insane, but that does happen among recruiters. So yes, ties to high school coaches in the South, ties to all these guys who put together camps in the South. I mean, Jabari Davis, former Vol, puts together camps. You have ties to those guys, ties to other coaches at other schools in the SEC. All of those play a factor. And unless Kalen DeBoer has secretly built up a recruiting network that I'm not aware of, he does not have those connections right now in Tuscaloosa.
No, and he doesn't have to. The thing is, you need to have assistants who have them, though, don't you? Like, Nick Saban had no ties at all when he went to Louisiana, but he hired assistants who had ties.
Yes. And he made it his mission to, while he was the LSU coach, to control the state. I mean, he did an incredible job. And this, I want to point this out too real quick before you finish your thought. General Nealon said some of these high school coaches won't even let you in if they don't know you. That's very true. That's 110. I've seen that happen before. Guys get locked out. I don't think that's what a high school coach should do, but it does happen. And it happens a lot in the South with allegiances. Go ahead, Caleb.
No, that's a very good point. You're right. It does. And also coaches will, it's funny you bring up Nick Saban. I did some research. Frank Wilson, who was at Tennessee when he was the head coach at Perry in New Orleans, he was funneling kids to LSU and Nick Saban largely because he wanted a college coaching job at LSU. And
that's the old, what was his name? What was Vincent Yarborough's coach's name?
Oh, something in high school,
Grant.
I don't remember.
He looked sleepy all the time. Why do you think he was the guy who booked the hotels and booked the travel for Tennessee's basketball team? Why do you think Del Baker was a Vol, who ended up being pretty good, but because he was Vincent's half brother? I mean, they basically took everybody they needed from Vincent's high school to get Vincent.
Yeah, you're right. That is true. Wasn't Derek Stribling from there too? I could be wrong on that. Don't quote me, but he could be. But all I would say is that, yeah, high school coaches funnel players to a school in hopes of getting a job there. The worst, by the way, Hugh Freeze. Michael Orr wasn't the first. Hugh Freeze was funneling players to Ole Miss for years when he was at Briarcrest because he wanted a job at Ole Miss. Okay, that he was funneling players out of Memphis to Ole Miss, players that Tennessee wanted.
It was obvious. Yeah. It was absolutely obvious. I don't. And I've got a big problem with that because if you're more worried about your future than you are the kids, then you're going to limit his opportunities. And Caleb, that is the frustrating part. I knew, and I got into as heated of a debate as I'm going to get in with recruiting, because usually I just step away. I'm like not into it. I mean, I've had Jalen Ramsey get mad at me and all this stuff. I'm like, okay, fine. So there was a player in the mid-state area that went to Alabama. Well, I knew for a fact that the coach steered him to Alabama. And there are coaches that do that. And those are the coaches, honestly, that you want on your side. It's kind of dirty pool, and the player's interest might not be at the top of the list. But when all's said and done, who cares if you get the player? But I don't think Kalen DeBoer is going to have that. I think that Josh Heupel has done a really good job of building that, partly because of that culture we talk about so often.
Yeah, Josh Heupel has established a very good culture at Tennessee. Josh Heupel is, and this is the interesting part about Josh Heupel that I think sells well. And honestly, I think Dabo Swinney started this culture at Clemson, Dave, funny enough. let's give Dabo some credit. One difference between Dabo and Nick Saban is, don't you feel like when Clemson is winning titles, the players are more at the forefront than the coach?
The players are more at the forefront than the coach in college football? I wouldn't say so.
No. At Clemson specifically. With Clemson, when they won their 2 titles, you thought Deshaun Watson, you thought Trevor Lawrence, you thought Amari Rodgers, T. Higgins, Shaq Lawson. When Alabama won the title, you thought Nick Saban. And I feel like Dabo.
But don't we almost have to take Saban out of all these conversations? Because
you think Kirby Smart with Georgia. You think Kirby Smart with Georgia too. You don't think Georgia's players. You thought Kirby Smart.
Okay, who do you think? Southern California. Who do you think? Texas. Who do you think?
What if they won national titles recently?
Well, no, they haven't. But I mean, the face of the program, most oftentimes are coaches, aren't they?
But what I'm getting at is that there is a difference. There are some schools where the coach is the face of the program, and every bit of success they have, you think of the coach first, and others you think of the players first. And I think Josh Heupel has really installed a culture of Tennessee where the players get the credit before he does. We talked about Hendon Hooker more than we talked about Josh Heupel in 2022, didn't we? Throughout that season?
Yes.
Do you think Alabama's ever talking about Mac Jones more than Nick Saban or Jalen Hurts or Jalen Milroe or any of those players more than they were talking about Nick Saban?
No, Saban's going to be the topic of conversation, which I can certainly understand that. I mean, he should be.
Right. And that's actually a credit to, that's one thing that could help DeBoer with recruiting is I think he does say you'll kind of be more of an individualist yourself. You won't be just some cog in my system, because everybody talked about Michael Penix last year more than Kalen DeBoer. I didn't know Kalen DeBoer's name halfway through the year, and I don't think you did either. So
no,
I think that
you said Penix. It's my daily Beavis and Butthead impression.
But on a long story short, is building Washington South going to work at Alabama, or will that put them behind the 8-ball talent-wise?
Again, I think you've got to copy what Josh Heupel's done. I don't want to sound like a broken record, and it doesn't appear like they're going to do that. If they can find those NIL dollars, they can ship $10 million from donations to the university to NIL. Things can change very rapidly. Cash talks, but I'm not sure.
But that's the problem. Kalen DeBoer, part of the culture has to do with the school itself. And the culture of the Alabama school is players are just puzzle pieces and cogs that come through and are gone, but it's the school that matters. That's how Alabama's been.
Okay, I see what you're driving at there, and I can agree with that. It was funny. There was a point that Alabama had so many good running backs that you kind of forgot which one was which when they went to the NFL. Was he before him or he before him? So I see your point.